Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host Ren, and today we continue with the Belmont Saga, Part 3, Chapter 2, Haunted. So last week we finished up Part 2. We saw the passing of Paymaster Stenstrom's mother. This is not a surprise, we knew she was passed away, but to actually see it, and I felt it was a touching chapter, a closure to the first part of his life and the beginning of the rest of it, as he becomes the paymaster of the Seeker, becomes Captain Davidge's paymaster, and so on and so forth. Then we move on to Chapter 1 in Part 3, Missing, where Paymaster Stenstrom, Lord A-Ram, and Private Taara are on their way at a very slow speed, but are moving nonetheless towards Baz, flying backwards, using the stolen TAC transport Westminster as a drive engine. Taara, using the Molly, had rigged up rudimentary sextant that she was using to navigate and guide the ship. She announced the ship is kind of wobbly, kind of lopsided. It needs regular burns to get it back into the trajectory it needs to be to link up with Onaris, fly around Onaris, do a gravity turn, pick up some speed, and head on to Baz in time to deliver the brandy. And in 20 hours is the next burn. They're all been exhausted, haven't really had a regular sleep since they've been on the ship. A-Ram sets the alarm, locks the helm, and they all drift off. Even Paymaster Stenstrom, even though he's watchful and trying to keep guard over his two friends. He falls asleep. 20 hours later, the alarm goes off. He wakes up, and he's alone on the bridge. And that's where we left off. And looking out through his windows, he sees the aft of the ship, the long neck, the body of the ship far away, then the wings, and then he sees a light come on and then go off. A very sinister and foreboding thing to see right as the chapter ends. So let's proceed immediately. Part 3, Chapter 2, Haunted. And this is a fairly short chapter. Normally I'd go on and read the next one, but it's a long chapter. So we'll just take care of Haunted, and then next week we will proceed. There are only 4 chapters in this third part of the book, so after this one, we will be halfway done. Let's proceed. Part 3, Chapter 2, Haunted. Anger and frustration surged through him as he stood alone on the bridge. What had happened? Had A-Ram's demon come for Taara at last, and also taken A-Ram in the process? Somewhere in the middle of 20 hours of sleep. Blast! He was supposed to protect them. They trusted him, and look what he'd done. Fallen asleep, and not just for a few hours, but for nearly a day. And furthermore, they needed to do a course correction and burn, change the angle of the ship, otherwise they'd soar off course. Rudderless into the wildlands, Taara had called it. An empty, lonely stretch of space. Space. What a poor captain he was. Space was a term for scholars and astronomers. Fleet captains called the open stretches between the stars the deep sea. As Captain Davidge would have put it, the wildlands was a patch of bad sea, a small and insignificant area passed over in the blink of an eye. Of course, stuck in his dead ship flying backwards, this patch of dead sea was an unending ocean. He turned back and stared at the lonely helm wheel locked in place. Without A-Ram standing there, or without Captain Davidge, the helm seemed to him an alien and incomprehensible thing. The alarm blared. It was time to alter course and burn the Westminster's engines. He had no idea how to accomplish either task. He checked the arcane detectors he'd set up. They were still in place. Whatever had entered the bridge and taken them had overcome several layers of arcane protection, his holy stones and bolabungs and his silver talismans. He went to the lift and cranked open the doors. Darkness from the empty shaft filtered into the lit-up comfort of the bridge. As usual, he heard strange noises and a general feeling of dread bubble up from the bowels of the ship. And somewhere out there in all of that were Taara and A-Ram, his friends. He couldn't delay. He had to rescue them. Forget the ship, forget the burn. Their safe return was all that mattered. He should have never brought them here. He waved his hands and produced a small silver chest. Opening it, inside he found 3 oily holy stones with a shimmering chromatic surface. These chromatic holy stones were adept at locking on to specific people and zeroing in on them. The fun he and his sisters Lyra and Virginia used to have with them, hiding in the manor grounds and then being discovered. The excitement, the laughter in the afternoon sun. The chromatics were difficult to make and expensive, and they only worked for a short time, but they should help him locate Taara and A-Ram. He grabbed Tara's left boot and dropped one of the chromatic holy stones down into it. The holy stone needed a few minutes to soak up Tara's essence. He took advantage of the time. He checked his ints, replaced the cinnabar strikers, and gave them the general once-over. The strikers were locked in place and sound, the hammers oiled and smooth. They should be ready to fire. He cocked the hammers and put 2 shots through the near wall of the bridge. The shots were nice and bright, emerald green, just like they should be. So beautiful to look at, and so dangerous as well. They passed through the wall without damaging it and continued on, unseen, until they dissipated. He sashed them. He checked his HRN. Marzibles, ready. Holy stones, fully kitted out. Greens, reds, blues, the works. He was ready to go. He shook his hands, and there gleaming was his locket with Lily's face hiding within. The demure smile, the hopeful blue eyes. He'd fantasized about bringing her aboard someday and giving her the grand tour of his amazing ship. Arm in arm. He'd give anything to see her again, to give him courage. He placed the locket back in his HRN and moved Tara's boot around, hearing the chromatic holy stone rattle around inside like a marble. Enough time should have passed. He dumped it out onto the floor. The oily surface of the chromatic had dried up, turning into a dirty-looking brown. Now the chromatic should point the way towards A-Ram for the next hour or so. It lay there on the floor next to her boot, doing nothing. It had to work. It just had to. He leaned down over it. "Don't mess this up," he said, and gave it a slight tap. The holy stone began rolling, picking up speed. It headed toward the lift at a quickening pace. He picked it up and allowed it to settle into his palm. Time to go. He steeled himself and plunged into the low-grav dark, beginning the perilous climb down the groaning, sound-filled lift shaft. The shaft was rotten and noisy. Groans, creaks, unidentifiable titterings, and other softer sounds lurking behind the louder noises. So far, the Seeker had been, except for the bridge, a groaning mess, haunted with shadows and twisting movements of the night that they'd rather avoid if they could. Stenstrom had tried to ignore it at first, but the sounds he heard coming from the bowels of the ship couldn't be explained as simply the aches and pains of an old silent ship torquing through space. His old ship, the Sandwich, was also a noisy, groaning vessel ready to sink in open space at any time, but it never made eerie sounds like what the Seeker was doing. The Sandwich never formed words and made dire sentences. The astral plane, could it be at work in the bowels of the ship, clouding his mind? His holy stones meant to detect the astral plane were silent, did not seem to be present. Something else was at work in the dark. As he made the climb down the shaft, Stenstrom tried not to listen, but he could hear, plain as day, "Belmont, where's your mother, Belmont?" He looked up at the open door to the bridge with its yellow cone of light pooling out to the shaft. It was a comforting sight. He had to concentrate. He had a job to do. He checked the holy stone. He felt it tugging a few more levels down. He continued on, trying to ignore the noises. "Belmont, your mother died alone," a voice whispered in his ear with startling clarity. The things haunting the ship were getting personal. He closed his eyes. My mother died surrounded by her husband and her children, all except one. His mother's death and his not being at her side haunted him to the present. It was a place in his thoughts he tried to avoid. The guilt and recriminations. The voices brought back her loss to him fully, and the evil lurking in the shaft seemed to know that. Where was her son? Doing what she asked me to do. My mother is at peace. Is she? Are you sure? He had to say it to himself several times. My mother is at peace. My mother is at peace. The insufferable noises dogged him all the way down to deck 7. The holy stone knocked, indicating he was approximately level with Taara's position. He pried the door open and plunged into the dark. The shadows and noises were even more pronounced in the corridor than they had been in the lift shaft. The air was cold and stale. The thought of Lily, bright and pink and full of light, flashed across his mind. This dark abyss was certainly no place she belonged. He shook open a yellow holy stone for light, and instantly dropped it in shock. 4 towering figures lit up in the holy stone's glow. They stood not 3 feet away, 4 pairs of dark eyes boring into him. He dropped the holy stone and drew his ince. When he looked back up, the 4 figures were gone. Just the great, darkened cavern of the deck lay ahead, stretching out into the gloom. He panned around with his ince at the ready. He thought for a moment that he'd just imagined seeing the figures. But no, they had been right there. He had seen them standing there, thin and tall, wearing white, coarse-spun robes stained yellow in the holy stone's light. He did not recall seeing their faces, for there hadn't been time, only their eyes, which had been dark and mirthless. Shaken from the phantom encounter, Stenstrom set the chromatic on the metal floor. He gave it a shove and it started rolling, slowly at first and then quickening down the corridor. He followed, ince ready. The corridor was like a witch's dance, echoing with disturbing sounds and hidden noises. The previous captain, Captain Gona of St. Paris, had retired, it was said, because he thought the Seeker was haunted. And with a cacophony like this, who could blame him? Stenstrom concentrated on his friends, on Captain Davidge, on dear Lieutenant Kylos, and the beautiful Countess Sigillis. This was once their ship. They walked these very corridors. They are still here in the dark somewhere. He tried to remember their goodness and their light. The holy stone continued on into the dank reaches of the ship, rolling fast with a fuss. He was moving through the long neck of the vessel. It was quite a walk to the rear section. Wait! Ahead he saw a figure moving in the dark. Who's there? Answer me! Who's there? A chiding laugh came back in return. He lifted his inth and cocked the hammer. Where is Lord A-Ram? Where is Taara? He asked, not expecting an answer. Yet one came.
We have her. We have your little girl.
Return her! Laughter in response. Return her to me at once! There was a momentary respite of silence, and then...
She belongs to us, as do you.
Who are you?
You know us.
A voice whispered. Show yourself! He whirled around, dropping the yellow holy stone and drawing his second inth.
You want her back?
The voice asked. Show yourself!
Very well.
In the dark, a figure emerged, thin and tall, leering and dreadful. Stenstrom covered it with his pistols. If you've come for Taara's soul, you cannot have it, he said. And the figure giggled.
We are here for a soul, but it's not hers, or that little man's either.
It paused.
We're here for yours.
It revealed its face, a huge smiling mouth all over the disc of its face, a great tongue sticking out. Soul Devourer. It cringed and wrung its hands. He raised his ince, ready to fire.
No, wait,
it said.
Leave your friends. I'll let my companions kill them, eat their souls, consigning them to oblivion.
Where are they?
Not far. Not far.
Show me. The soul devourer led Stenstrom down the corridor. It danced around him, savoring his smell, wringing its clawed hands. It was just barely containing itself. Why didn't you just take me on the bridge while I slept and been done with it?
Safe on the bridge. Couldn't get to you, but your friends.
How do I know they're still alive?
Their souls are tiny and bland. Hardly worth the trouble, but yours shall make fine eating.
It tittered and reached with its hands, opening and closing its fists.
Took us on a merry run, did you? Think you could get away forever?
My mother is gone, and her spells are finished. You ought to go back from whence you came and leave me in peace. You may have my soul, once I'm done with it.
We shall have your soul now, understand? We shall have it now.
The soul devourer pushed him up against a bulkhead and put its clawed hands at his throat. It lost whatever patience it had and pawed at him.
They promised us your soul. It belongs to us. Give me your soul. Give it to me. Give it to us now.
Stenstrom pushed his ince into its chest and fired. Green light emerged from the soul devourer's groaning mouth, and it fell, collapsing into a smoking pile. Panting, feeling the familiar tug in his chest caused by their infernal grasp, he took a moment to compose himself. Footsteps came running down the corridor, a tooth-filled, smiling face and reaching hands.
Your soul!
He aimed and fired. Its body fell in the dark. And behind him, fire! 2 green globes surged out. Did he hit? He wasn't sure. He cocked his hammers and waited. Laughter came from down the corridor.
We have your friends. You cannot kill us all. We are ready for you. Keep us waiting and we'll savor their souls in your place.
Leave my friends out of this, he shouted. My soul for theirs.
Then come to us and bring your soul.
Mother's demons had finally caught up to him, and now they had his friends. He searched for the chromatic holy stone, finding it down the corridor, still rolling slowly. Steeling himself and determined to save Taara and A-Ram, he continued on. And with that, we conclude Part 3, Chapter 2, Haunted. That was hard to do. My gosh, I've got a sore throat now from all that growling and groveling. And it's hard to do these soul-devourer creatures. Whoa. So, Lord Stenstrom is in a bit of a pickle. His friends are gone, apparently abducted by soul devourers, and he has to travel deep into the bowels of the ship to locate them. He has a chromatic holy stone which can lock on to someone's essence. In this case, Taara's. He put it in her boot and shook it around, and now he's following it down this corridor, and he's already encountered 2 soul devourers and killed them both. Who knows how many more are waiting for him? Obviously there are more, because one just spoke to him. When he saw the light come on in the ship, it was far away in the main body of the ship, towards the ventral part of the ship, almost towards the bottom. So he's got a long way to go, and in the dark the ship seems miserable with spirits, their voices chiding him along the way, forming dire sentences. And it probably takes a fair amount of courage to, even if you have weapons that can kill just about anything, bad things can happen. So next week we will continue Part 3, Chapter 3, The Demon, with 2 question marks at the end. The Demon? The Demon? So however you pronounce it, That is next week. And that's a fairly long chapter. Otherwise, I would have just continued on with that one, making this kind of a short reading. So, until then, this is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.